What is going on, everyone? It's your guy, Cole Jackson, back here on Road Graders, coming to you 1 week out from the 2025 NFL Draft. And there is no better time than to get you guys ready with the absolute best resource you can get, and that is the 2025 NFL Draft Guide. This has been developed specifically for fans of the Baltimore Ravens, and I'm bringing on one of my good friends and the pen of this. And I got to be very clear about this. I didn't write this. This is all James Ogden of UK Ravens. James, how is it going, my friend?
It's going great, Cole. Great to do this.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, we haven't done this in a while, so I'm glad we can finally connect again and kind of do what kind of brought us together in the first place a few years ago, and that's go through the NFL draft. So for those out there, just give us a little bit of info. Where will this be published? I'll obviously drop the link in the description below, but where are you going to be putting this information out?
Yeah, it's going to be all through my socials on X. I'm also I think I am going to be on Blue Sky, so you can get on Blue Sky and on my website, which is red-baltimore.com. So you'll find it all over those places. I'm going to try and get it in a few other places sure as well. Maybe hop onto Reddit and get it out there and do some different places. So yeah, find it all over the place.
Love it. So redstarbaltimore.com is the go-to. So I'll drop that link down below so you guys can go check that out. And so this is for those of you that haven't read this in previous years. So this is, I always love this tool because it reads very much like, when you look at the Bleacher Report, scouting reports, when you look at the NFL.com ones that Lance Zierlein does, even Dane Brugler's, it gives you kind of good insight into the background, the strengths and the weaknesses of each player. But what James has done, and where I think this is so valuable to Ravens fans, is he has a section in there that's called Ravens Fit. And what that does is it takes the player that you're going to be interested in reading about, and it walks you through the fit on the team. So not just their skill set, but also the scheme of the Ravens and how they'd fit into that model. So James, tell me a little bit about how you develop that section. And because I think that's really where Ravens fans will get so much value out of this tool.
Yeah, so I think that's I agree with you. That's the kind of the unique selling point for this guide. Like I'm sure I have a lot of respect for Dane Brugler and Matt Waldman and all sorts of guys that do their draft analysis. And so you can read what I think about the player agnostically as a sort of report about the player's traits and strengths and weaknesses. But what you do get is the Ravens Fit section, which I build. The reason I do that is because when I was sort of taught officially to evaluate players, even though I've been doing it for a lot longer than when I actually had some teaching on it, the Scouting Academy, there's so much to understand that when people NFL teams are evaluating players for their team. So everybody's board looks very different, and everybody will have a different set of 150 odd players on their board because some players will be off their board because they don't fit for that team. So what I try to do is give you a view of how that prospect is going to fit with the Ravens from what I know from the Ravens. And so that section is built off a few different things. First of all, it's the traits that I know they like at different positions. Some of them are universal. So they're under Eric DeCosta, they are always looking for explosive athleticism, especially at the top of the draft, explosion being a big part of that. That's why I call it explosive athleticism. Football intelligence, they're looking for how quickly do you process the game, I should say. Are you versatile, which applies more in different positions than others, but I think it has started to get pretty universal for the Ravens about looking for that versatility at different positions. Grit, which they have said over the years that they look for specifically, and obviously that's kind of a buzzword for toughness and physicality. They do look for that in their draft prospects, and then from those traits, which I sort of speak to specifically in the Ravens projection, I'll then start to talk about scheme and how they fit schematically with the Ravens. And I think a great example of that is say the interior offensive line, where you are probably looking for a guy. The Ravens are multiple in their running game. They do want a guy who can zone and gap block, but I think they've moved more towards zone over time. And so I think they are looking for guys that aren't, they're looking for guys who can do a little bit of both, but I think they can stomach more a guy who has a bit of a deficiency as a gap blocker than they can a guy who doesn't move very well in space. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for in a schematic review. And I'll weave that through all the different positions. And then finally, just a quick assessment of where are they going to be day one on this depth chart? How are they going to fit? Are they going to be a rotational piece? Are they going to be filling a gap? Are they going to replace a guy that we think is starting right now?
Yeah, that makes sense. And you also added a new section to the draft guide this year. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've always struggled with comps. Like, I think comps are a great way to understand a player and to understand where they are. But then when I get into starting to think about comps for prospects, and I've thought about doing it for a number of years, I really struggle with making a comp fit, because I always sort of think, well, it's not that guy because of this, and this, and it's not that guy because of this, and this. And so every player is unique, and so I always feel like I don't like comps. Anyway, I've had to get with it. So now we have in my draft guide a Ravens draft pick comp. So I've made it very difficult for myself. That is a small pool of players. Like, there are some totally ridiculous ones that really don't work. Kelvin Banks is one that sticks out, where I had to kind of like say Orlando Brown Jr. and then put like 5 caveats on that comp, because he's nothing like Orlando Brown Jr. But some of them just don't fit, but some of them fit really well. So
wait, I got to interrupt. What'd you put for James Pierce Jr.?
Now let me just check, because I don't remember. But I'll find that as I'm going. But I think
it's not Odafe Owe, we need to edit it.
So I'm quite low on Pierce Jr. But so this is interesting, because I think the if you're lower on Pierce Jr. than other people, I think the comp is David Ajabo, which is who I put in.
He's got the explosive athleticism for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think if you're a bit higher, you probably go away. If you're a bit lower like me, you probably.
I just did it specifically because when I watched Alabama and Oklahoma, I was shocked at how many times he got to the quarterback and missed a sack. Like, it was staggering. Like 5 times across 2 games. I haven't seen anything since Owe, so it was shocking to me.
So this is the thing where I get to with comps, where I'm like, I kind of like the Owe comp, but then also I really liked Owe's run defense coming out of Penn State.
Yeah, and very different players in that way.
So it's kind of like, but you can make that argument either way with loads of different players, can't you? So, but some of them are quite fun. I try and do a kind of, if anyone's ever seen Danny Kelly's draft guide at the Ringer, he makes his comps really fun, and I would go and do that. He sort of crosses guys with animals and all sorts of things, and it's great. And I've tried to do that a little bit. I'm quite low on Nicky Manmori, and I gave him a comp of Miles Boykin, which I trying to be a little bit funny about. Miles Boykin played safety, but yeah, so trying to have a bit of fun with it. But yeah, it's a nice addition to the guide this year.
All right, so I'm really looking forward to reading those. Those are going to be fun. But what I want to do now is just kind of go through some of the Ravens positions of needs. Pick your brain on some guys you like, some guys you don't like. And I want to start with the offensive line, and I want to give you one of my thoughts and see what you think. So when I'm focusing on what I would say, like, there's been rumors that they're looking at a guy like George Fant to bring him in as a swing tackle. And I definitely think swing tackle is a big need that the Ravens have to address, probably in the mid rounds. But when I'm looking at an early round draft pick on the offensive line, my personal focus has been obviously on bringing in guard competition, but I've kind of shied away from some of the true guards. So guys like Tyler Booker, who I may like as a player, but to me, the real value in spending that early pick is getting someone that's kind of a transitioning tackle that could play guard day one, but then have that long-term ability as an offensive tackle. So looking at the Donovan Jackson, the Wyatt Malooms, I should have a list in front of me. Those types of guys. So give me kind of your thoughts on, I guess, what you see as the need specifically with an early round O-line pick, and then some of the guys that you've watched that you really like for that type of projection.
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if they go with a true guard, as you're mentioning, in the first round. It doesn't seem like the last time they did that was Ben Grubbs, who is my comp actually for Donovan Jackson this year. Although Ben Grubbs was a guard only, and Donovan Jackson, I think, actually could play offensive tackle. So we'll see with that. I think I'm with you that it would be a versatile pick. It would be a guy, and there's loads of them in this draft right at the top, where you can. Where the floor is a very good guard, and then the ceiling is potentially an offensive tackle, and there are differing levels of them, right? There are some guys where I can see him playing left tackle, like Ariante Essery is a guy who I think could play left tackle with some development, which means you let Rosengarten stay on the right side, or it's somebody else where you are then thinking about does Rosengarten develop over time and eventually move over to the left side as he did in college? So he played left in college his season before the season he came out, and then moved over when the blind side changed because the quarterback changed. So then he moved over to the right. So I think Rosengarten has a chance potentially of playing that left side. So then you're sort of looking at saying, can we develop this guy down the line? And he moves Rosengarten over. But I think for me, they have to get some high level competition in for Falele and Voorhees. Like they have to get a guy in who could displace them year one. I'm begging them not to spend a 4th round pick on a guard again, where you're going to sit this guy for 2-3 years and then we might have a guy that we can use. So I think that's the thing for me. I'd like to see them pick a guy with a premium pick that they might be able to move out to tackle in the future. And there's a few guys like that in this class.
So who do you see who kind of pops out as, I guess, 1 or 2 of your favorites that could do that?
So we've sort of mentioned them, the 2 already. I think that the main one that you would consider taking the first is Donovan Jackson for me. The guy, I think he's a starting guard with Pro Bowl potential in a heavier zone scheme. I think if he continues to develop as a run blocker, he's going to work he's going to be able to work from a gap perspective as well. His pass protection is outstanding. You know, he's got a wide balanced base. He moves with precision, efficiency. I like his hand timing, his lat strength. And all of that put together brings him really remarkable consistency as a pass protector for me. And he can also drop a rock solid anchor. So you've got no trouble with him playing inside at guard next to Ronnie Stanley for the next couple of years. And I think the thing for me is that he stepped in to play left tackle that final year. And it was rocky the first couple of games, but he worked it out. And down the stretch, he was very good outside.
A lot of people said he was a better tackle than he was a guard. It was really quite remarkable at the steps he took.
Yeah, and it was the trajectory, right? Like he was a guard. He was a good guard for a long time, and I think he can be a very good guard in the NFL. But when you looked at the trajectory he took from when he first stuck in the snap 1 at tackle to whatever it ended up being, snap few hundred at tackle, it was a very different guy. And so you sort of think, okay, and that's something I think the Ravens look for quite a lot. They look for development potential. Like they are looking at how this guy is going to, what is their growth mindset like? They speak to their coaches, they speak to the training staff in these different programs and find out as much as they can through the interviews about what is this guy going to be in terms of his talent development arc. And they'll use the tape to do some of that. And with Donovan Jackson, you could see it. You could just really clearly see it over the course of a few games. And so that tends to suggest there's a ceiling there, offensive tackle. So Jackson, I think, is probably the perfect fit for that type of guy in round 1. But the other guy I really like is Ariante Ursary, which we shouldn't dwell on too much, I suppose, because we're talking. I mean, we're road graders, so it's fine. We can talk O-line as much.
Oh no, we'll talk O-line for a bit.
No, I think for me, he's a lot further away from being a kind of Pro Bowl level starter than Jackson is. But I do think he can play inside out. And the thing for me is what I watch when I see Ursary is when I did study at the Scouting Academy, they had the foresight to record Howard Mudd talking for about an hour and a half about what he looks for in an offensive lineman. And the thing that really stuck out to me with him was he talked about how can a guy really uncoil his leverage at the point of contact? Does he have explosive strength, or is he just a pusher? And some of the biggest hits I've had in terms of looking at guys in the draft and thinking this guy could turn into something is when I've been looking for that trait. And I think Ursary has that. He has really explosive strength, I think, and he has the power and movement skills that you'd look for to be able to develop into a guy who can face elite competition at the next level. I think he's probably, again, better as a zone blocker than he is sort of mano-a-mano at the line of scrimmage. But I do see him needing to improve his technique, especially against guys who are really widely aligned outside. And so at the moment, he struggles with the very best pass rushers, but I think he can step in day one as a guard. I think he would probably displace one of the two guys day one, Voorhees or Falele. And then I think you see what you get, and you see whether you can develop him. And in a couple of years, maybe this is a guy like a Tyler Smith who can move outside. And that's the sort of the guy I often go to. I really struggled with his drafted Raven comp. So I felt like the struggle I had with a lot of these comps was you end up saying that a guy's going to be like, my comp for Luther Burden was like a higher, basically what the Ravens thought Mark Clayton would be. And most people would be like, Mark Clayton, no thanks. But that I do really like Luther Burden. So with Ariante Ursary, the comp was Jar Reed. But I think he would have a significantly better career than Jar Reed. Right. And I actually think he could probably be a more athletic Kelechi Osemele in terms of the way he's built, with a better chance to stick at tackle than KO did. But like I think he's a really interesting guy that I really like.
Okay, and then there's three guys that are kind of I'd say more like pick 60 to 90 type guys that I think are I sort of think about as guys that could step in at guard and have that long-term tackle ability, but I haven't quite been able to land on whether or not I think they have the functional strength to be able to play inside day one. And I'm worried about, especially if it's a right guard replacement, putting a guy with insufficient functional strength beside Roger Rosengarten, who still needs to develop that part of his game in the run game. But I look at a guy like Marcus Mabau out of Purdue, Jonas Savannah out of Arizona, and Charles Ground out of William and Mary. I think those are three guys that aren't the same type of player necessarily, but they're the same sort of archetype in terms of being, high level athletes that may not have the most functional strength in the world. So how do you kind of look at those three types of guys and whether or not they fit that need that we're talking about?
So I really like Mabau. He would be my guy out of the three, probably, although I don't think Savannah is that far away. I think he would be pretty close and possibly on a similar level. But Mabau I really like. I think he's a guy that fits really well with the Ravens rushing scheme. I think he works so well in space. I think the reason he is so for me, you didn't see him get challenged too much with his anchor. Like, it was a pretty small sample size. He just didn't face that enough of like that kind of elite competition that really, really had great play strength and knew how to challenge him into his chest and get him to set his anchor to drop his anchor. I felt like he did have reasonably nice technique in terms of jumping back and resetting his feet and re-anchoring when he was challenged. But there was I do think it is a bit of a projection of how he would handle those elite play strength guys in the NFL and from an interior defensive line perspective. The thing I just trusted with Mabau for that conversion, and trust me, I do, like, for anyone who doesn't, like, I do think a lot about these conversion jobs. They just don't just happen automatically. You've got to think about what's going to work. And the thing that I always look for, as much as that functional strength, I always look for technique and how good is this guy in his technique, because your functional strength comes not only from your core strength, but it comes from your technique as well. And Mabau is a guy who's just really, really technically proficient, I felt. And so I felt like he could do a really good job to sort of maximize that play strength. But I think you make a great point about putting him next to a guy who is also trying to maximize his play strength through technique that maybe would give you a bit of pause there.
Yeah, that's exactly kind of how I viewed it. And then one last question on the O-line before we move on is, when we're looking at, I've been asking for a developmental swing tackle since like 2018. I think 2018 is the last time they drafted one, and it was, can't think of his name, tall guy. He was like 6'8". It was like a 6th-round pick, and then it feels like they haven't gone back to that developmental swing tackle since. And so guys that I've looked at are guys like Logan Brown, Chase Lunt, Jack Nelson. Those are kind of the guys that I like the most. Is there anyone that kind of stood out to you that would be that kind of like maybe a 4th, probably a 5th, into the 6th type that would be developmental swing tackle guys? So those guys that maybe you won't get a starter out of until year 3, but could potentially develop into that Ronnie Stanley replacement.
So there's two guys I like. I'll give you like a high upside guy and a high floor guy. My high upside guy would be Carson Vincent out of Alabama A&M. You're probably going to be able to get him a little bit later. I like Charles Grant too, but I think Charles Grant did not go to the Senior Bowl. Carson Vincent did. And while Vincent did not like cover himself in glory at the Senior Bowl, what you did see was progress across the week with him. And you also saw him start to take that NFL coaching quite well. And you also get to see him against that elite competition and say, actually, and I think they also played Auburn, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
So you've got a little bit of film on him where he's playing a bit better competition. And so I feel a bit more comfortable projecting who he is. And so I quite like Vincent from that perspective. I think he is raw and he struggles with his technique. He struggles with his timing and his placement in his hands. And I think good competition can set him up. But his foot speed, his quickness, the size of him, his explosion, really, I think, contribute to his ceiling, which I think is pretty high. I don't think he was great in when he was asked to drive block, down block, but in space he was good. So I feel like there's a lot to work with there in terms of a sort of moldable piece of clay. So I really like Vincent, especially for the value you're going to get him at, I would imagine. And then the other guy I really like, who I just felt was just like a competitive technician that I just really loved, was a Johnny Cornelius from Oregon, who like I kept watching these edge rushers in this class and then kept like seeing them struggle against Oregon on the left side of the defensive line. I was like, who are they taking on here? And I kept noticing Cornelius. So I watched him. Like there are definitely limitations with him. And I think he's maybe the challenge here is that he's maybe not a swing tackle, because I don't know that he's ever going to be able to play on the left side. But as a versatile guy who I could see playing guard and right tackle, I think that works. I think his footwork in pass protection can get him in some trouble against some edge rushers that have got a much bigger kind of arsenal of moves to deploy. But he's really good with his hands. He's an assassin with his hands. And once he gets them on you, like he's going to win his fair share of reps against good competition because of that. The footwork isn't an easy thing to fix, so you sort of give yourself a bit of pause with that. But I really like him as a competitor, and sort of the toughness that he brings to the game, and just how good he was with his hands. And I'm a little bit of a sucker for that kind of the hands technique. It just draws me in on prospects usually.
Hands, technique, and violence. You can't really get a better combination than that. And I find the guys that pop to me when I'm watching someone else always stick in my brain a little bit longer. For me, that was Tonka Hemingway and Omar Norman Lott were just two guys that I was watching. James Pierce and Kyle Kennard, and I just kept pausing, being like, who's 91, who's 55? And those are kind of the guys that stick with me just because they're taking advantage of those reps and being explosive. So moving off the offensive line, so I think we got a good sense there. I think you made a really good point earlier about looking at a premium draft pick, because I've been saying that about the edge rusher spot, because I don't want to see another third, fourth, fifth round pick at edge. They've been struggling there. They kind of have those guys, a guy like Adisa Isaac, who I kind of want to see develop a little bit, but I don't really know if we need another one. But I could see a round 1, round 2 pick being spent at the edge rusher position. So who in that type of mold pops to you the most? Who are guys that stood out, not just from a great Ravens fit perspective, but from guys that you might be higher on the most?
Yeah, so I think for me, there are a couple of guys. I think the way I feel about this edge class is that I don't think it's as strong as other people think it is.
Completely agree.
I think it has some guys at the top that I'd be intrigued by, but I don't think they're. I mean, at the top, I don't think that, apart from Abdul Carter, I don't think they're slam dunk picks. Like I really like Shamar Stewart. I really like Mike Green. Those guys are going to be gone by the time the Ravens pick, but they are guys who I like in this class as edge rushers, but they're not guys where you're sort of running the card up in the top 5 picks for those guys. So the thing I would say about this class is that for me, there is one guy that I would take at 26, but that is it in terms of from the edge rusher class. And so that guy is Donovan Eziraku, who I really like. I think he's, he's a guy who I think when you look at him, he's someone who you want to find that the Ravens are looking for that guy who has that explosive athleticism, but also has the polish and production that they haven't got in previous years. I think Eziraku fits that mold. I think he has a few lethal pass rush moves that help him take down the quarterback. I think he could stand to add some more to his repertoire, because I think teams will. I think good offensive linemen will start to sit on those couple of moves. So I think I would want to see him add some more to his arsenal. But I think he's highly explosive. I think he's got an exciting starting point because you can see his rush plan put together to make that work make those moves work in college. And sometimes you don't need to add more to your arsenal. You just need to know how to get home with the moves you have that work. And so I think he does a really good job of that. I think he's got great athleticism. I think he's got a great body for the position, with the long arms, and his burst and first step quickness in obvious passing downs is frightening. I think there's plenty to work with as a run defender too. So for me, I think like Iziraku is the guy who, if he falls into their lap, I think he's the guy who is the right, who would be there at the intersection of need and value. I think that you would not be forcing it. If you took Iziraku, I feel like he would be one of the top 15 to 20 guys in this draft for me. So I'd be happy taking him there. There are some other guys I like further down the line, but they are more developmental type guys.
So just give us like, who are those guys in a brief little synopsis?
Yeah, so for me, I think that's Jordan Birch is a guy I really like at Oregon. So he's sort of definitely a bigger guy, and someone who could be a really interesting developmental pass rusher for the Ravens. There's lots there already with him, and so I really like Birch. The other guy I really like, and I love talking about, is Ashton Gilotti out of Louisville, who is going to get underdrafted because he's such a weird shape. And he's just this weird looking guy who's like, you think, how is this guy an edge rusher? Like, he's a bit thick in the pants, but he's squat. You think, how does this work? But he plays with such leverage.
There's a few of those guys in this class. Like, I'd say Elijah Roberts is in that mold.
Yeah.
Thick but short but explosive. Like, it's a very weird mold that seems to be becoming a little bit more prevalent in recent years, just because you're getting these guys that are undersized but are getting thick and maintaining their explosiveness off the edge.
Yeah. And I think the thing with Gilotti, I think it's a theme a little bit that is starting to emerge with defenders into the draft out of college, is you need to try and start looking past what these college defenses are asking them to do. So Gilotti is constantly asked to play the 4-eye, play the 5 technique. And at 6'2", 264 pounds, it's not his best place to play. He can play there, and he played there pretty well, especially against the run. He played with great leverage, great play strength. But where you saw him excel as a pass rusher was when they bumped him a little bit outside a bit more, and he was able to use that explosive athleticism that he has. But he's only just starting to scratch the surface of how that works, because he wasn't asked to do it very much. And so he's a guy who I like in terms of, I think he's going to get underdrafted because of the way Louisville played him and because of the way he looks. But I actually think there's a lot of potential there.
Completely agree. And then when we slide inside to some of these interior defensive line guys, like a guy that I've really enjoyed watching his tape was Derek Harmon. I think he was just very disruptive, very explosive. There's definitely some issues that he needs to clean up, especially with his pad level, just with his sheer size. But watching them kind of slide him around, I really liked how he did damage from the zero tech. They'd use their alignment to create that one-on-one with the center, and I thought he took advantage of that. I mentioned Norman Lott, who I just thought was very explosive. He's got run game limitations, but as someone that can kind of bring pass rush juice, a guy that I've talked about a lot as a late round pick is Tonka Hemingway. I don't think he's going to be great against the run, but as a guy that you can get out there on obvious passing downs. So who are some of those interior defensive linemen that you see as specifically being guys that can come in and very quickly impact the pass rush game?
So Harmon's the guy, right? I'm totally there with you. I think he's like he feels like a draft analyst kind of connoisseur of a prospect. Like if you watch him for long enough, you start to really appreciate the small details in his game. Like the thing that you want from a pass rusher, especially inside, is a guy who knows how to win, knows how to put together his rush plan. And Harmon, I think for me, the way I was taught to sort of evaluate rush plans was in the same way that pitchers put their pitch mix together. And the very best pass rushers will have an arsenal of pass rush moves that sort of look like the same move up until they're not the same move, because you're going to put the higher processing offensive linemen in trouble because they don't know what's coming. They think it's your fastball, but actually it's your curveball. And with Harmon, that was what I found most impressive, was that he had this, like his fastball was like a really effective club rip move that he has, but then he has other things that he can use that look really like it. Like he's got like a counter club that was really effective. He's got a pull slide that was really effective as well. And like, there's just some, like, he really put his rush together so well. He was such a competent pass rusher, as well as having all the athletic tools that you need to. So he's got the ceiling there as well. So I love Harmon and would love to see the Ravens jump on that. I think it's a great class for interior defensive line pass rushers for me. Like, I think you can get them all over. I like Shamar Turner quite a lot out of Texas A&M. There's a lot of like things to try and get to get right with Shamar Turner. You've got to make sure that you're comfortable with the punching guys in the groin and the various things that he did at Texas A&M. But the guy apparently idolized Ray Lewis growing up, and I'm sure he'd love to be a Raven. But he's a guy who, lots to work with there as a pass rusher in terms of his explosive ability. There's, I like TJ Sanders, I like Darius Alexander, and I also like Omar Norman Lott as well. Like want to see what he would do with a much fuller snap count, and kind of cursing Tennessee for the way they rotated him. But I think there was enough there to suggest, he came off the field so much on rundowns, but I thought there was enough there when he did get a chance to defend the run that you sort of was like, well, now why are you taking this guy off? I'm not sure. I think he can play the run. And so, I think there's guys all through the draft actually in the interior defensive line where you can sort of talk yourself into the pass rush upside with some of those guys, but definitely would be starting with Harmon. And I like Walter Nolan too, actually.
Yeah, I just did an episode yesterday on Monday of all the interior defensive linemen, and I had most of those guys covered just because that's who popped to me with the most pass rush upside. Walter Nolan's relentlessness, it really goes to show that if you don't win early, how much value there is in continuing a rep and getting into those secondary and even tertiary pass rush moves, and how it can actually be so impactful on the quarterback. So that covers most of that. Before, I think we got about 10 minutes left just to kind of wrap up. Secondary guys. So I don't know if you've looked at a lot of corners, a lot of safeties, but just give us a little bit of a summary of some of the guys that pop to you as good Ravens fits that could come in. And, I've had a hard time deciding if it's a corner I want, if it's a safety, because they impact each other so much with how the Ravens can deploy guys. So just kind of talk through some of the guys that you think would be good fits and how the Ravens are currently using their DBs, especially with the impact on moving Kyle Hamilton and Ardarius Washington.
Yeah, so that's the really interesting move, right, for what the Ravens want to do, because you saw even when they were trying to make Marcus Williams and Eddie Jackson work, that they were still moving.
What a fail.
I mean, I looked back at the snap counts and I realized they tried for like 8-9 games. Like, I'd forgotten it was that long.
It was about 6 games too long.
Yeah, I feel like I put it out of my mind as this awful like period of time when I just was like, so I've forgotten that they've tried it for so long. But even when they were doing that, they were trying to move Marlon Humphrey inside more. He played more in the slot. Even when they were doing that, it wasn't just a feature of, like, they didn't just move Marlon Humphrey inside more because they moved Hamilton back. They were trying to put them both inside. Give Hamilton that free role, but also have Humphrey inside too. And obviously it didn't work. So I think they want to do that more. Like, he's getting on in age a bit, obviously, Humphrey, and I think they want to move him inside a bit more. But I think what they'll be looking for is a guy with outside-inside versatility, because I think you want to do that slowly. And I also think you want to probably play the matchups, which is why I love Jedi Barron for the Ravens. There's just no way he's going to be there. I'm trying to convince myself that.
I don't know. It feels like a guy that would slip because other teams won't know how to use him. So they're going to talk themselves out of the pick. And those are the guys that I feel like the Ravens feast on.
They really do, don't they? And the other thing that'll make him slip is the same thing that made Trent McDuffie slip, which is guys who have the minimum, the teams that have those minimums, and they'll say his arms are too short, which is a crazy thing with Jedi Barron. When you plug in the tape, the guy just gets like the thing that I've always been taught to evaluate with ball skills is once it gets to the catch point, how accurate are your hands and how well timed are your hands. And if you can put those two things together, you can get onto like you can't make an effective receiver wide enough to stop a guy with short arms but good hand timing and placement from breaking up the pass. Like he would have to have the broadest chest you've ever seen, and he'd never be able to turn. So it doesn't matter how short his arms are if he has those traits, and that's what Jedi Baron has in spades. I think he's got plenty of athleticism too. You know, he can cover up those short arms easily, but he's a great corner, and he's an instinctive, intelligent, highly intelligent guy too. So I would love to see Baron fall to the Ravens. He would be, him or Harmon are the two kind of dream scenarios for me in terms of falling to the Ravens, as guys who really shouldn't fall to the Ravens. So I like Baron. I think in terms of the corner class, I think it's an interesting one. It's one where you're sort of talking yourself into guys a little bit, and I feel like I feel like if I was setting my board, I'm not sure the need and value would ever really match up with some of these guys and where I would want to take them. So I do like Benjamin Morrison in the second as well. So that's another guy who I would look to the Ravens. He reminds me a little bit of Marlon Humphrey, probably a less athletic version, but with the way he plays the game. So that's interesting. The ones for me is from a safety perspective. It's really interesting watching guys and thinking about who could give the Ravens a bit more, make them a bit more complex and a bit more multiple on the back end. They really, really wanted Marcus Williams to work, even in tandem with Adarius Washington. They wanted a guy who could rotate and play the post, and it would give them some different things that they could do in coverage, which is why I really like Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame for the Ravens, because he could definitely do that. He has great range, and I love the way he gets off his spot quickly. Like, he is so intelligent, and so I really like him for that perspective. And I think because of the slightly down athleticism that he has, he probably will fall. Possibly not to the bottom of the second round, but maybe he does, and that would be great, because I do really think highly of him. But the other guy who was one of the last guys I actually ended up studying that I really liked was Jonas Sanker out of Virginia, who was a guy who I think fits the same mold as Ashton Gilotti in terms of a guy who was sort of misused a bit, but was miscast, but was also playing on a terrible defense. And lots of the things that he did, I felt, lots of the things where you sort of ding him for on tape were because he was just playing as part of a really bad defense and was trying to make things happen and trying to cover up for other guys' mistakes. But he's got outstanding click and close. His drive mechanics are really clean. He's got hard hitting physical collisions when he gets to the ball carrier, gets off his spot quickly as well. And I think there's some limitations in man coverage with him, but everything else you're looking for, I think, at that spot. So I really like Sanker too as another sort of later round safety. And obviously I think Malachi Starks would be a nice fit with the Ravens if he falls.
Okay, so before we let you go, one last question. Who's going to be the one guy that's taken in, let's say, post round 4? So let's call him a late round guy that we look back in 5 years and we say, how the hell did he go in round 5, round 6, round 7? So who's that one guy to you in this entire draft class?
I think the guy for me is probably, so I'm gonna go back to the offensive line, I think. And I think the guy for me that I would put in that mold, I think, is someone who's gonna go, do I go offensive line? I was just thinking about another. You've put me on the spot here, and I'm like, who's the best? Let's go back to the offensive line, because I think there are quite a few interesting guys in this class from an offensive line perspective who could end up just falling, and then there's a guy to take later on. So who I'm going to go with, it's such a tough one, because it's who's the guy who's. I'm going to go with Emory Jones out of LSU, because I think he's going to fall, right?
Yeah.
I think because there's a lot of bad tape with Emory Jones. He's really inconsistent, and the real challenge with him is his footwork could be a problem that he's just never going to get over, and it really should cloud any evaluation of him. But the reason I'm picking him is because of the way the Ravens, I think, are going to go at that. Is because of the Ravens' developmental track record at that position on the offensive line. and I know obviously, God rest his soul, Joe D'Alessandris isn't with us anymore, but they've still proven over the course of the last year that they still got that kind of that developmental ability in house. I think the thing with him is he's like I said, he's got a problem with his footwork, but those long arms give him such a margin for error. He's technically excellent with his hands, especially when he's working with independent hands. I think he's better. He's better as a gap blocker, but at least serviceable in space. And I'd like to see him probably be I felt like he was a bit spent when he got to the second level a bit and couldn't necessarily exert his leverage. And so I was hoping that would come with maybe some additional conditioning and a bit like you can make it work with him. But he's nasty. And if you can get more efficiency into his footwork, and that was the main thing for me with the footwork, I think he could become a solid pass protector. And then you've got what I think is like a middling starter in the league, possibly more, for what I think will be a day three type value. And so there's so much room to grow there. I wouldn't spend more than a third round pick on him, but if you can get him in the day 3 and you get him into a program where you can develop him, I think there's a real chance for him to be a good player down the line.
And that's exactly what I'm looking for. That guy that I think can be one of those guys you look back on and you're like, we got him in what round? And so for me, I'm going to stick to the O-line and just guys that I've watched that have popped to me. And I'm so convinced by certain college programs that where you come from, they just always end up being good. And Jack Nelson out of Wisconsin was just that guy for me this year. Just Wisconsin continues to produce guys that find a way to make it work. He's been kind of consistently in that day 3 range, and I just really see a path to him being a successful NFL tackle. I think it's going to take a little bit of time. He's not the best athlete. He's not the best technician right now, but he has a lot of the tools that I think lend itself well to guys figuring it out. And he's coming from a school of that type of caliber. I'd put Connor Colby, but I think he's going to actually go a little bit earlier than we as mock drafters seem to think. That type of athleticism and his size, I think is going to develop really well inside at the NFL level in a zone scheme. So those are kind of my 2 guys. I'm obviously a huge fan of Big Ten offensive line football, but they're the factories, right? If Notre Dame was a Big Ten school, the Big Ten would own basically every factory that produces good offensive linemen. So we're going to wrap there. So James, once again, tell us where we can not only find the draft guide, but your work, what you have coming up. Just give us kind of the overview.
Yeah, you can hit. So I think the first thing to say is you can hear me on all kinds of. So if you've heard me here, you can hear me on the UK Ravens podcast, which will be coming out at the same time as this. You can hear me on the Deep Cover podcast doing the bracket show, which I always love doing each year, which is cool. If you want to read the guide, it'll be obviously the link for the video, but also you'll find it on my socials. My handle is @NFL Ogden on X, so you can find it there. And my website is redstarbaltimore.com, which is where you'll find the download link for the full guide.
Absolutely love it. And thank you so much for giving us so much of your time today. Best of luck with everything you have coming up. Can't wait to kind of recap the draft class with you. Hopefully we can get together, maybe do a little bit of film.
That'd be great. That'd be great, Cole. Thanks.
Awesome. Man. Take care, buddy.